future together. I'm going to hand over to Zachary. He's going to moderate the session for us this afternoon. And so welcome to you all, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. And thank you all for coming out today and having this excellent session with us today. So just to start, what are we doing at COP? You know, why are we here? What are your perspectives? What organizations are you with? And give us a little background.
So I'm happy to start off. So all of us here are fellows of the Alliance of Small Island States. Basically, the small island states are very vulnerable to the climate crisis. There are 39 countries that are SIDS, as we put it. And so we all come from either the Pacific, the Caribbean, or the ACE, the Atlantic, Indian Ocean, South China Seas. And we're based in New York supporting our missions, our Seychelles, in my case, Antigua and Barbuda. I'll let the others carry on with their introductions, but we're essentially there to help out our missions in terms of being involved with the UNFCCC and other international environmental laws. And we're joined also today by our two fellowship directors, who are legal experts, diplomatic experts who have basically been able to help us out in the last year understand what is exactly the UNFCCC, what is exactly international environmental law, and all that's around it. And we're at COP to basically be exposed to the process and help in various thematic areas, AOSIS, get the best deal for small and developing states.
Of course, my name is Lisana. I'm from the Commonwealth of Dominica in the Caribbean. And I am here also to assist, in addition to what Jeremy said, but to assist my national country with the support and the thematic areas that we are interested in at this COP. Also to assist the AOSIS team and to really shed light on what Dominica has been going through when it comes to loss and damage, you know, to raise awareness on the practicality of these things. So I look forward to this discussion.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tiffany van Ravenswaay, and I'm an AOSIS fellow from Suriname. Suriname is also from part of the Caribbean. We are not an island, but we are one of the smallest countries in South America. So we actually also have similar climate change effects as the islands. And yeah, so I'm here about to shed light on the subject as well, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And I'm here at the COP to also support my national delegation. And it's really important to participate in these discussions, because these outcomes will have effect on our countries as well. So it's better to be part of the conversation and join the fight together with our people that have similar views as us, and come with one message and tackle this together. Thank you.
Kia ora all. My name's Isaac Ryan. I'm from the Cook Islands. A little bit different to my colleagues and friends up on the stage. The Cook Islands isn't actually a UN member state, so I'm working for the mission of Belize. But at the negotiations here with my Cook Island delegation, much like everyone else, participating in the process and building upon the fellowship experiences. My particular area for the negotiations, climate finance, obviously a very delicate and sensitive area, and one that we need to explore and make sure that we have concrete action on. I think I'll leave it there until we get into the discussions, but nice to see you all.
Hi everyone, my name is Chandra, and I'm from the Federated States of Micronesia, and I'm here with our AOSIS fellows to support our fellowship and also our delegations. And so it's important to remember that developing countries don't always have the manpower to attend these conferences, to attend these meetings, and so oftentimes our voices aren't heard. Our needs are not being met, our needs are not being expressed, and so it's really an honor to be here and to make sure that those needs are being shared, and to make sure that other countries are hearing what's going on in our country. And so when we're asking for action, we can all share in these collective needs and make sure that it's one giant wave of information, so that it brings more power to this message that we bring to people. Thank you.
All right, excellent, excellent. So what I'm hearing as a theme really is sharing, support, the fact that developing countries, especially small island and small countries, are having issues with representation and actually being in the room. So that leads to the next question. As a group message, or perhaps from your individual perspectives as well, what's your understanding when you hear climate justice? What does climate justice mean to you?
I can go first, but I think it's going to be quite a diverse set of answers. I was asked this actually this morning in a private sector setting, and I think this setting is a bit different from that. But climate justice, you have to think about intergenerational justice. You have to think about cross-regional justice, and intra as well as inter justice. And justice for you and me means what is right, what is wrong. And when you've seen something wrong happen, and we see something wrong keeps happening, we've got to speak up about it, and we've got to find some way of getting to the right side of things. And so we have to think about that in our future sense. We have to think about past tense. We have to think in our own countries, in other countries. Who's to blame? Who can solve these things? These are all part of the justice question. And setting things right, whether it's in human rights, whether it's in property, whether it's in other aspects of our lives, it's about setting things right when we talk about justice in a very fundamental way.
I'll just echo what Jeremy is saying. It's actually quite funny. I was having a discussion with Chandra on the bus this morning to COP. If I try to frame it in a way that I guess I think about it, living in a small island developing state and being susceptible to the adverse impacts of climate change, we often, within the negotiation settings, look at the developed and developing context, and I think it's important to hold that front and centre. We are at the front lines of something that we haven't created of our own volition, but it is something that we have to deal with on a continuous basis. When you have these small communities, my country, 15 islands, population of 15,000 people, spread across, we're dealing with it on a day in, day out basis. It's front and centre. It's not something we can turn our mind off to. And we have to use, budget appropriation within our own national settings, which is diverted from health or education. So I think from a justice perspective, we need to make sure that that is brought into the discussion. We are obviously laying the foundations for the future for us. We are going to be here in, the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, 2100, which is where the IPCC is kind of leading us towards with their reporting. So we need to make sure that a lot of that messaging is here and being tabled across the media, within the rooms. And I think the youth are doing that, so we just need to amplify that.
So, louder? Oh, okay. So, with climate justice, it's also accountability, I guess. Like, we know who is responsible for this, and it's also being accountable for what you're doing. And small islands are contributing so little to the problem of climate change, and yet they're asking us to also give so much into mitigating or, pressuring us to do as much as they're doing. But I'm thinking, which isn't fair. So that's where the climate justice comes in, and that's why we're fighting, as small island states to come together and saying like, no, we need a response fund for all the losses and damages that we're suffering at the moment. And it's not like you're doing us a favor for, for creating this type of fund. It's just a safety net for us in terms of all the bad that is happening at the moment, where we're like really in the front line of these effects. And we're seeing our land becoming smaller and smaller as we're talking about small, long onset events. So you're seeing the problem, especially with smaller states. You're seeing it, and you can't do anything about it. So, yeah, that's one of my perspectives.
I'm going. I think of climate justice as righting a wrong. You think about justice and acknowledging who's done the wrong and who's being wronged. We all come from developing islands, and these islands are characterized by being small, tiny, remote, and far from resources. And we've managed to live on those islands for a long time, not having, much needed from outside. And now we're dealing with impacts of changes. We see the water coming up closer. We're changing our behavior in our islands, and our behavior hasn't caused this. And so when we think about climate justice, it's really bringing these issues to the table, bringing them to the international realm to say, we didn't do anything, we didn't contribute to this. How are we? We're willing to play the game. We're willing to come in here and be a part of the solution. How do you want to be a part of this solution? How do you want to join hands with us? Because at this point, it's about our survival. We need climate justice. We need to survive.
Well, to echo some of the sentiments that were already said here, for us in Dominica, I think that the climate justice is really a serious thing that we need to take into consideration, because when we get hit by extreme weather events such as hurricanes and tropical storms, the impact that we get on the country is severe, and everybody has a right to live without fear. I feel like it's a violation of human rights, and I think that it is definitely unfair to go to bed not knowing what will happen when you wake up the next morning, not knowing if the island will be completely flattened, roofs will be blown away, flooding, landslides, etc. So I think that because we have contributed very little, less than 1%, to this phenomenon called climate change, I think that countries should have the moral responsibility to act accordingly. Thank you.
I really appreciate how honest all of those answers were. I definitely share the sentiment myself, coming from an island, that climate justice is about righting a wrong. And I think you guys have articulated very well that small islands haven't really caused the problem, but we are experiencing a lot of the effects. Now, I think to the benefit of our audience and those watching online, it might be useful to get into some of those effects, like some concrete examples. I've noted that we mentioned having to divert funds or being unsure what we're going to wake up to the next morning. But can we get some, I don't know, more, if you guys are willing to share, more aids on what do you mean when we say climate's adverse effects? What are the loss and damage that your countries are facing?
Maybe I'll just start by painting the picture from our climate finance landscape. So SEDS have received between 2016 and 2020 about 1.5 billion in our climate finance, which is minute in comparison to our needs and priorities to respond to these effects. If you look at some of the reporting that's come out in the 2022 report between 2019 and 2021, about 630 odd billion was directed into climate finance, but majority of that was towards mitigation, about 90 odd %. My country contributes less than 1%. It's 0.00014. So I mean, how do you mitigate when you're looking at that minuscule level, but at the same time you're on the front lines of dealing with adverse impacts? There's already statistics out there saying that annual loss and damage associated with climate change is about 2.1% on average, but within the Pacific region, that's more or less around 6.5%, and it's going to be growing more as we get towards 2030 with those figures hitting double digits. So I think we need to understand the finance first and foremost in order to help us respond and address these issues that we are facing. For the Cook Islands, we are facing both economic and non-economic losses. I won't delve into that just yet because I think we'll probably touch on that a little bit further. But I think that's probably just helps my fellows up here paint a little bit of a picture around the quantums that we're looking at. It is quite enormous. Those billions will turn into trillions. But yeah, I'll leave it there and then I might jump back in a little bit later.
Well, like I mentioned before, Dominica is very vulnerable to extreme weather events. And the impacts that we face, it's severe. With regards to loss and damage on our most recent Hurricane Maria in 2019, we had, it affected 224% of our GDP. That was a total of losses of $930 million and damages $380 million. And I think that this is something that really should be put out there, and to know that we now, as a small island state with very little capacity, little resources, now have to figure out how are we going to cope, how are we going to adapt with this loss and damage following these extreme weather events. And I should also mention that hurricanes and storms also come with a lot of flooding and a lot of mass movement. So it's not only the heavy winds and the heavy rainfall, but you have that of coastal flooding. You have flash flooding, you have riverine flooding, because we're an island of 365 rivers. Can you imagine 365 rivers on a small island flooding all communities that are mainly located along the coast of the island, where we are connected by bridges? And when these bridges get destroyed, we're basically out of communication with each other from end to end. So these are things, these are the impacts that we need to take into consideration. Other impacts include, loss of power, utilities, power and water and so forth. Things that we need to live on a daily basis. And now we have to figure out how we're going to find the finances to really deal with that following the events. And when we source these finances, and in the form of loans, etc., then that puts us back decades of economic development. And that's really something that we really need to push for. That's why the Loss and Damage Response Fund is critical for islands like Dominica, because we are extremely vulnerable.
So for Suriname, it's more, we don't have hurricane seasons or anything that we're blessed with not getting hurricanes or typhoons. But we do have like tropical storms and slow onset events. So because we're really low lying, so our coast, because of sea level rise, is becoming, people have to move inward, inland. People have to be displaced. Farmers have to move their agricultural land because of saltwater intrusion. And even, I know, I can remember like when I was younger, there was like one flood happening in the interior, and by the interior I mean in the rainforest, part of the Amazon as well, where there was a flooding and a couple of people died in one of the villages because they couldn't move fast enough. And a lot of people had to be displaced into the city. And if you think about people being displaced, taken out of their pristine environment and being put into, a city like that, you have loss of culture, of course, loss of land, and it also becomes like a culture shock as well for them because they're not used to these types of things. And how do you, as a developing country, deal with that? You don't have the resources or the support to help these these people, And, oops, sorry. Yeah, so these are one of the few losses and damage. And yeah, as I mentioned, it was when I was little. Now every year there's like a flood, and not even only in the rainforest, but also in the city. Like you wake up in the morning because of too much rainfall, and your whole house is flooded, and you have nowhere to go. And that's in the city. So now we have to move inland. And so you're just seeing before your eyes your country getting smaller and smaller because of the sea level rise. And sorry, a fly is bugging me. Yeah, and yeah, now it's every year, and we have in Suriname, we have seasons, right? You have the dry season and you have the rainy season. Now, because of climate change, you don't even know which season it is because it's raining in the dry season and it's wet, and it's dry in the in the rainy season. It's like, what is going on? Like everything is out of order. You have to also try to adapt to those certain types of things because if there's no rain, how are you going to wet your crops and that kind of stuff? How are you going to grow your crops? And it's a lot that we have to deal with because of climate change. And yeah, we don't have the support necessary for this. And that's why, as you mentioned, the Loss and Damage Fund is really critical for islands and small countries like ours.
So something that I've found really interesting during this AOSIS fellowship is to see the similarities between our small island developing states. We share so many similarities in terms of the way that we're dealing with climate change. Many of us are already beginning to build our homes further inland. Many of us are already growing saltwater resistant crops, staple crops. Our children have already tasted saltwater resistant crops. We're sending our fishermen further out into dangerous waters for food. When we think about the way that climate change as a buzzword has evolved in the past 10 years, it's not indicative of what we're doing in the islands already. We've already begun to change our behavior. We've already had to deal with this issue. And so when we bring the issue of loss and damage to the table, this is years of experience that we're bringing and trying to negotiate for help. So it's encouraging to see that we have a lot of similarities, and so our voice will be stronger in these rooms.
If I can come in quickly, and I think what Chandra's definitely speaking to is our special circumstances. And I think also what I want to touch on is scale, because I think you can relate to a lot of what's been said. So when we talk about special circumstances, you have to understand we are countries of under 100,000, maybe up to 1 million people maximum. When we're talking about special circumstances, we are thinking of lacks of economics of scales. We're remote. We have very small amount of economic choices, either tourism, fisheries, maybe agriculture, and some other things. So when you hear from Dominica that 90% of your GDP is gone, or 224% of your GDP gone, if you can think about that in America, America's economy is something like 21 trillion. If you had the same event happen to a country like America, where you have 224% of your GDP gone overnight, you're looking at $50 trillion. That's the richest country in the world that wouldn't be able to survive that. I mean, having the chance to visit Antigua and Barbuda, I remember Zachary, and definitely you should elaborate on this, not just as a moderator, but in going on this topic. I think having a whole island, Barbuda, having to evacuate. I mean, can we imagine a whole community having to evacuate from a storm and there's no ability to respond to that storm? I come from Seychelles, which is in a position where we don't have cyclones, where we have tropical storms. But I can remember when corals were basically vibrant and pristine. And in the last 2 decades, I'm getting into 28, so maybe you can say 3 decades, we've seen coral bleaching not only increase, but also become more severe. So the frequency is increasing. And so we know that the ecosystem value for our tourism, for our fisheries, it means our local fishermen cannot get the kind of fish that they had before. It means the nutrition goes down. It means we need to import more. Again, the debt that's been discussed is an issue. So we have to think about small island states on a scale because it's all relatable. It will all happen to your countries as well. It'll just happen into us first. And we're really here to not just be the doom and gloom, but you'll hear also that there's solutions. I mean, we talk about corals not just being bleached, but also have research going on to find the most regenerative, the most resilient corals out there. The kind of crops that have been tested on small island states and other vulnerable countries, such as in Africa, they are going to be useful for all these other developed countries that are causing these issues. But we don't have the resources. We can be hotbeds for innovation, for solutions that can scale up. We're willing to test things out. We have been testing it out, innovative finance and other things, but we need to basically be given the kind of right attention. And I think something that Lizana had told, and there's so many conversations we had, but I remember you had said something about people being afraid of the wind. That's the first sign of hurricanes coming. I mean, there's a whole non-economic aspect to this thing when your culture is destroyed. I know Philomone from Fiji, who's here as well, who was talking about how whole communities, their cemeteries they've been told that this will be gone and you'll lose your ancestry. I mean, there's no price that can be put on this. And so we talk about adaptation, we talk about mitigation because we don't want these things to happen in the first place. The reason we're talking about loss and damage is because those things are happening and they will happen to everybody else. And it'll be too great, the cost.
Definitely. Thank you so much for all the inputs. And I think I also would take the opportunity to just share my own perspective in that I think we're all saying the same thing. Loss and damage is a response. And I think what a lot of people don't understand, they associate loss and damage only with extreme weather events. But from our examples, loss and damage includes the loss of culture. It includes it includes fear, to be quite honest. It includes fear about what our future is going to look like. And very eloquently put by Chandra, it is happening now to the small islands and the small states. And the world narrative seems to be that we're in the last stages of climate change and we need to do something now before it gets worse. The islands have been in that worst stage for a while now, and that's why we are asking for a fund for assistance. So in relation to Antigua and Barbuda, where I am from, we're a country made up of 2 main islands and some smaller islands that are surrounding the 2 main ones. And Barbuda was hit by a hurricane in 2017. 98% of the infrastructure on the island was gone. Not damaged, was gone. The strength of the hurricane was such that the person, if you did not move from Barbuda to Antigua before the hurricane hit, we could not do anything until the hurricane passed. And then after the hurricane passed, and I think this is also something that speaks to the special circumstances of islands, recovery is different in islands as well, because to recover Barbuda, all of the instruments, all of the relief, all of the coordination was done in Antigua, but then we have to take a 3-hour boat to Barbuda, and then you have to set up a base in Barbuda to start dishing out whatever recovery action that you're doing. But then, at the end of the day, because 98% of the infrastructure is gone, you then have to start deconstructing what you have constructed today and move it back to Antigua. And this process continues for a few weeks before you can actually say that there is something tangible on the island that you can operate out of. And these small details, they don't occur when you are speaking to, big development agencies or bodies that think, oh, well, we've given you this support, so just use the support. There's nuance. There's a reality that exists with our reality that doesn't necessarily get discussed or doesn't get talked about, doesn't get thought about when we're trying to actualize relief. And that is something else that doesn't necessarily get engaged with, and that's what we're trying to tell the world. It's not a us versus them situation. This is going to affect all of us, and we are just, unfortunately, have been guinea pigs for a while now. So we're trying to get assistance to replicate, make our responses better, and export it to the world, because the rest of the world will be dealing with this very soon.
So, and forgive me for joining late, but thank you so much for sharing your stories. I thought that was really, really impactful. But you mentioned, I think, Jeremy, you mentioned the opportunities and the new solutions. Does anyone want to share about some new solutions that are available? I mean, I think it'll be really helpful to think about what are some new solutions that are coming to the table. Tiffany?
Oh,
yeah?
Sure.
Since you haven't, you have the mic, go ahead.
So in Suriname, as I mentioned, we're a developing country, so you're gonna have to be innovative. You're gonna have to be innovative in your solutions. So you see what you have in front of you, and you gotta work with what you have. So we're thinking about nature-based solutions, for examples, or local or indigenous knowledge, for example. And one of those solutions is what we used for our coast for sea water intrusion is replanting our mangroves, for instance. Like a whole mangroves forest has been planted in front of our coast, just so that nature, if you nurture nature, it will take care of you, sort of. And that's the approach that we're taking in Suriname with regards to our climate impacts. That's just one of the examples. I'll give the others the opportunity to elaborate on theirs.
Just on the point of nurturing nature, Antigua and Barbuda as well has gone into research with coral reef nurseries, because as Jeremy mentioned, and as Chandra pointed out, we all are facing the same thing. So coral bleaching is happening in Antigua quite rampantly as well. We have a few coral reef nurseries towards the southern part of our island with the hopes that we're looking into resiliency, which species are better capable to deal with the increasing temperatures.
Okay. Chandra, anything you want to add to New Solutions?
What comes to mind for Federated States of Micronesia is we're a large ocean state, and so we think a lot about how we preserve and conserve our protein, our fish. And so we've dedicated a lot of area in our oceans to as a marine protected area. And again, we go back to nature-based solutions. What can developing countries do? How do we empower our own communities to take action with limited resources? And so we try to do our best to use what we do have. And so in addition to that, we are also planting mangroves, similar to Suriname. And our ancestors knew this. They knew this. They've been planting mangroves for several years and always protecting. And so when we think about development, unfortunately, a lot of times that means we pave paradise and put up a parking lot. And we need to go back to planting trees and planting mangroves and having that relationship with nature again, being connected with the environment the way we used to be.
You know, it's Zach, I saw you were coming in, but I was just pointing out to Suriname. They just released a study, and there's 7 countries in the world that are already at net zero, and 3 of those are in the Caribbean, and 1 is Suriname. And I think a lot of times in the region, we don't get the recognition for the advancements that we have, the fact that we are working in harmony with nature. And I think these are opportunities that we can capitalize on to get greater attention and to get more of a spotlight, because what we're asking for is not aid or assistance. What we're asking for is that wealth that is harming us, that carbon in the atmosphere, to repatriate that wealth to solve some of the problems that it's caused. And I like to be super clear on what we're asking for is not assistance, because there is a cost to the carbon and we are the ones bearing that cost. Yeah? Zach?
So, just Jeremy. It's all good. It's all good. From my side, I just wanted to, based on we talked about finance. So we're not waiting for finance in sense. So we've been innovative. So I know Seychelles is a leader with this in terms of we had a debt for nature swap, and now we're seeing countries like Belize, we're seeing countries like Barbados. I believe there's another African country, if I might be mistaken, maybe Ghana. But there's all these solutions in terms of finance that we're saying, hey, we're understanding that this is something, whether there's debt out there, whether there's other things, so we can find a way in which for our nature that nurtures us, or whether it's in terms of carbon sequestration and other things. They even talks around climate swaps being a discussion point. All these things are things that we are willing to put out and say, hey, this is what we're testing out. And in the case of Seychelles, we've been able to redirect funds so that it goes into conservation, it goes into adaptation. And so we've been able to do voluntary fish closures that weren't possible before without feasibility studies, so that fishermen are able to get fish all year round to feed their communities. The kind of science that's been taking place, so we can take, find the most resilient types of coral, find their genetics, and ensure that those are the ones that will still be around. I mean, islands are full of solutions. You know this, we know this. We just need the attention from the international community to come and talk to us. Yeah. And whether it's traditional or local, married with scientific, we're quite good at this, and we should be trusted partners.
Yeah. Isaac, I haven't heard from you.
I think I'll just pick up on the point that Jeremy raised around the debt issue. So, I mean, for Belize, working in the Belize mission in New York, being able to go out to credit holders and buy back your debt on 45 or 55 cents on the dollar, and then use that funding that you would have been servicing your debt on and actually redirecting it into your climate change adaptation efforts, allows you to not only obviously respond and adapt to it, but then it releases some of that debt burden. So when I spoke earlier on that 1.5 billion received over 2016 to 2020, I didn't elaborate on the point that comparing that metric of 1.5 to the 26 or 27 billion that is paid to our external creditors in debt repayments. I mean, when you look at how much money is going to servicing our debt, which many of us are already in ridiculous amounts of, if we could actually channel that money into our own country to allow us to go through our adaptation actions, we wouldn't be in the position that we are, but we are forced to, because like my country, we are high income. We don't have access to concessionary financing, which is another issue altogether. And I think I'll take an opportunity to elaborate on the MVI, the Multi-Dimensional Vulnerability Index, which is something that we've been arguing for and articulating about, because finance or access to finance shouldn't just be on your GNI. When you're looking at a country of 15,000 people, and the figure is what, 12,000 or 13,000 US, when you have such a small population base and you have a few that are creaming it at the top, it doesn't take into account the situation on the ground, what the reality is. And when you have that kind of information at hand, recognizing our vulnerabilities and just uniqueness as SIDS, I guess that will then help elaborate on the picture that we have been trying to articulate, and I talk about the loss and damage issue here, for the last 30 years. So, I mean, we have been pioneering and getting along with business because we don't have another choice or option. But I think, yeah, that's just to complement some of the points that Jeremy was saying as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the fellows have said it, majority of it, honestly. And I think for us, we share the same, well, Dominica shares the same sentiments as what was said by the fellows, where we honestly need the money to adapt, to cope, and so forth. And that is something that really needs to be taken into consideration. We need to shed light on it. We have to continue saying it at each of these forums and each of the stages, you know, and it is necessary. It is definitely necessary. So I totally agree. I totally support.
But of all of the countries represented here, Dominica has some really unique opportunities with geothermal, etc. So coming out of this COP, what would you like to see most of all? What would you want to leave here with, either on behalf of Dominica or on behalf of climate action as a whole?
We honestly need the support. We need the support with regards to the different projects that we want to implement. Like you said, we are undergoing different renewable energy projects, such as the geothermal energy, or solar energy, or wind energy, and so forth. But we need the finance to implement these projects. You know, we need to get these finances from somewhere. We have ideas, we have ways in which we could potentially adapt and so forth if we have to, but we need that finance. We need it.
Yeah, so we're working really closely with Dominica on trying to monetize some of those geothermal zones, because we see that a lot of times we look at the transition to renewables as a cost center, but it really is an opportunity that will open up different areas of funding for the country to be able to explore adaptation, etc. But we also need to understand what are the mechanisms that we put in place to make sure that we monetize all of the opportunities that we have. So, Zach, yes, I'm going to ask you about, if you were to leave here with one thing, what would be the thing that you'd want to leave COP with?
If I was to leave here with one thing, I think, speaking on the national capacity, what Antigua and Barbuda has been pioneering at COP has really been a loss and damage response fund. And for all the reasons that have been stated on the stage here today, taking into account the starting point of islands, the economic insecurity, the risk and adverse effects that are increasing with frequency and severity, it really is untenable to continue on this path without some sort of support from the UNFCCC system. And if we don't get that support, we're heading, it is an existential crisis. Either we will be, and either the existential will come from climate adverse effects, or it will come from deaths. But one way or another, the islands won't survive.
And you know, we've gotten three sort of either city or country level pledges so far on loss and damage. We had Scotland and the city in Belgium, and Denmark now the first like country pledging to loss and damage, a couple of philanthropists. So the loss and damage fund now is at about 20 million. And we saw coming out of Hurricane Ian, like $67 billion worth of damage. Is there a point where it's going to be enough? You know, I think that's my concern right now on loss and damage.
Well, at this stage, I think that's not a question that we can answer. But the answer to the question really is, sorry.
No.
The answer to, or at least in my mind, the question should be rephrased as, is it that we should try? And I think the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement is a worldwide declaration that we as a globe are going to try all that we can to make sure that we survive this climate crisis. So I would say, to flip it around, that the pledges need to keep coming, and they will continue come as long as we have this climate crisis.
Okay, agreed. Jeremy?
Yeah, if I can add on to that a little bit. We see pledges. Pledges, commitments, promises. We rephrase things quite a lot in international diplomacy, quite often. We're quite good at it, I think. I think if we go into what has actually happened, and I mean, just to go into context, so Zachary follows the loss and damage. I follow global stock take, so does Tiffany. Lizana does markets and non-markets. Isaac's into finance, as you've heard. And Chandra is in adaptation. So we can definitely talk about this in more detail. But if you look at what has been pledged in 100 billion, the OECD, basically the developed world's way of understanding the metrics, say that they've given 83 billion towards climate finance, towards that 100 billion goal. But Oxfam will tell you, there's no actually way of understanding that. It's 22, maybe 26 billion. But the world will tell you we need something. Well, studies will show that we need something like 2 trillion, about 1-2% of the world's economic, to actually do the kind of things needed. So these figures are tiny.
Yeah.
When we're talking about loss and damage, if it's enough, the issue is we're paying for it already.
Yeah.
And we're going to go back to this issue of climate justice and what this funds. So the UNFCCC, the Paris Agreement, the tactics being used by those who are polluting are not willing to pay. They're willing to let our taxpayers pay, our communities pay, our future generations pay. So the question for me is not, is that enough, but is that too much on us? It already is. The question is, when are those who are basically, when are they going to pay their debt? When are they going to actually understand the externalities on us? I think that's something I want to add on to what we need. Maybe we can get 6 different things from this COP. But from my side, I think it's also adding on that there's environmentally harmful subsidies. Every year, $500 billion goes to fossil fuels. This is in a time when fossil fuels have had, industry has had huge profit. That profit shouldn't be existing when you actually think about the costs that it has on our communities.
Yeah.
Those should be repatriated, as we say.
Well, what can we do differently? Because I think that, well, one, I want to hear what you want to leave COP with. But two, like, we keep having the same conversations and we're making incremental progress, and progress is progress. But what can we do differently to get the attention of the people who are making the decisions that will allow us to be in a different situation than we are in now?
That's happening as we speak.
Okay.
So it's at play. So we can't always speak to everything happening. It's a closed process. But let me put it this way. There are countries that are gaining and continuing to stay in the way they are, and it's against their interest for things to change. We have to understand that fundamentally. Every time we have a COP and there's no pressure, every time there's no tension on these things, we have less chances of taking this on. So you see governments in Europe facing this, once in a lifetime cost of living crisis, the energy crisis, the geopolitics. We need people, taxpayers in those countries, to realize, hey, that money is actually hurting other people in other countries. They're becoming refugees to our countries. They might see there's aid being given out, but the reality is their governments are taking choices that are affecting them and other people. And in the years to come, it will hurt them even more.
Yeah.
And what will happen is we might be forgotten because people are looking inside, right?
Yeah.
They're trying to see what's going on. So we need to understand that these conferences, there's every effort being done by those who are losing badly and dying from climate change. But behind the closed doors, those who will lose out, who is not in their interest, they also try in every way to stop every sign of progress. That's the truth.
Yeah.
I'm not naming any names, but that's the truth.
Tiffany?
So for me, building on theirs, what they're going to leave it for COP, I would say I would like to see climate action, because everything is interlinked. So if people don't stop emitting, the losses and damages will keep happening, and we will be at a certain point where the earth will be so hot that won't be enjoyable, or our kids won't even be left with an earth to begin with. So I would like to see the big emitters, they're making their pledge come true, as in stop emitting, peak now. They're not even peaking yet.
Yeah.
If we're talking about, we're fighting for 1.5, and they're not even able to reach 1.5. Even with 1.5, 70% of our coral reefs won't even exist. You know, a lot of our small islands won't even exist at 1.5, and we're beyond 1.5 at the moment, but we're still fighting for it. There's still a chance, and this is this COP. We're trying to get that 1.5, and that's the least that where we want. So yeah, at this COP, I really want to see to stop the big emitters to stop emitting, to bend the curve.
This one.
I thought okay. Well, of course, like I discussed earlier with you guys, the loss and damage that we have experienced from, extreme weather events are very detrimental and so forth. We need to have that response fund. We need a response fund because when you have a country that has been flattened, flattened, biodiversity lost, even the birds, out of their normal habitats. You have unique species in your backyard, which is not normal because we are 65% rainforest, so we have a lot of biodiversity on the interior of the island and so forth. So you have this biodiversity loss, terrestrial ecosystems and marine ecosystems that are damaged. What are we going to do? We have low capacity, low resources. We need some type of response fund, so I feel, honestly, I keep reiterating, but this is critical. It is honestly critical, especially for Dominica, because like I mentioned before, even now, we experienced over the weekend, the east of the country had a huge landslide. It was a mud flow, persons were injured, roads were damaged. Where is the funds to respond to that? Where do we get it from? We have to go again and ask the outside source, whether we get it as loans, etc. And like I mentioned, it stunts the growth. It stunts our economic growth. And we need to ensure that persons are aware that this is happening. Just some rainfall, overnight rainfall, the east of the island, mudslides. We need that response fund.
Isaac?
Just elaborating on that point, I mean, we have these annual events annually, and, they happen, and then it takes us multiple years to recover, and while we're still recovering, we get hit again, and then we're recovering again. I just wanted to tag that a little bit on there, but I think for me, mitigation ambition, so IPCC has come out saying 3.3 by 2100, the NDC synthesis report is saying around 2.7, and I mean, if we are aiming for that as a globe, many of our countries here won't exist. In the Pacific, we've already got Tuvalu and Kiribati susceptible to sea level rise. They already move in communities. So, I mean, if we are holding the line around that 2.7, some of us won't even be at the negotiation table anymore. And, I mean, that links back to the climate justice that we started the whole discussion around. And I think within the Pacific, we're storytellers. We love to sing, we love to dance, we love to narrate. And I think we have been doing that for a very long time now. And I think, looking at some of the audience here, the youth are doing that as well across their various platforms, Instagram or any other social media platform. They are articulating it. And I think it needs to be more nuanced into the mainstream media. But the thing for me leaving COP would be that mitigation ambition. We need increased pledges. We can't hide behind the crisis that are occurring right now. We need to pierce that corporate veil and actually lift back and see what the actual reality is for us, because although they're experiencing some of the events, like my colleagues are saying, we've been experiencing this for 30-odd years, and it's only going to increase for all of us. So why don't we collectively as a globe move towards obviously trying to alleviate some of that harm, and that's where I think the mitigation ambition comes in, and for us, 1.5.
Thank you. I believe you asked two questions. So there was what can we do differently, and what do I hope to get out of this? And I think what we can do differently, I always advocate for voting. Youth, vote. Get out there, vote. Find the leader who stands on a platform for climate and vote for that person and push for that person to be in a position where they can be setting the rules and the boundaries. we have that voice. And if you don't use that, taxation without representation is tyranny. And so get out there and vote. What I expect to get out of this is also higher mitigation. I was at the Montreal Protocol meetings, and we talk about ozone depleting substances. And so it's not just CO2. We gotta decrease emissions on. It's methane. It's other ozone depleting substances. And so it's a holistic basket of gases that we need to start tackling, and we have to start tackling it now. And so applying pressure to those big emitters, and really not just in CO2, but in all the harmful gases. And I think I am really happy to see so much participation in these international conferences, and so these are gaining traction all over the world. And so continuing to participate in these worlds, in this realm, making sure our voices are heard as small island states, as developing countries, bringing our message continuously to the world.
All right. Do we have any questions from the audience?
My question is pretty straightforward. From everyone, what is the most effective way we can reach the goals you outlined? And how can young people collectively support that? And what is a specific mechanism to do so?
If I can start off with this fellowship, just to point out and use the fact that this fellowship is one where it's open to small island developing states if you want to be able to know and increase the capacity of your country to take part in these negotiations, but also help your country understand what's going on. So apply to these kind of fellowships, be here as you guys are here right now, take part of these, because when there are people who understand the history, the background of these things, your ministers or your other representatives here, they need that capacity if you're a small island developing state. So if you're a developed country, they need your eyes, they need your knowledge to keep them accountable. And I think the vote-in is something that's sort of being brought up, but if we can be here, if we can ask the right questions, and if you see someone's lying, maybe you can point that out. And I think that's something that's important at just this level. I think if we go back on the ground, I've been lucky enough to work with many young people, I'm talking 12 years old, getting them into this fight, especially if you're in a vulnerable country, the earlier the better. And not just giving them the doom, but giving them the solutions and being connected to to our networks that we have, so that they don't have to repeat the mistakes or take the long road in terms of fixing these things, so that they can jump to where they're actually doing impact as well. So I think that's key, two key bits from the international and from the ground.
The only thing that I would add is that would be a response for youth in vulnerable states, but I think youth in developed countries as well have a role to play. And I think even if per se you don't necessarily understand the plight that we're trying to communicate, living in a developed country, you do understand the plight that if nothing changes, your country will have the same effects that we are experiencing now. So despite the motivation, I think the action should still be the same, that you need to communicate with your own youths in the developed world. You also need to definitely vote and make sure that your representation reflects a view, an ideology of a world that you want to see, and you continue to protect that in whatever way you can.
Another question, great, yeah.
Hi, it's more of a comment than a question, and I do apologize. I came very late, so I missed most of the conversation. My name is Victoria Alice. I'm a youth delegate from the Seychelles. I just, based on the conversation we hear a lot about climate finance and unlocking finance for loss and damage, for adaptation. I think another key thing to take into account is access to finance is key, but then once we have access to that finance, how do we manage it? Do we have the internal resources to actually manage that? Those funds. And I think coming from SIDS, where I think most of us have limited human capacity and internal resources, so I think that's also a key question to bear in mind is, do we have what it takes to then, on the long term, implement and track and monitor? So yeah, that was just more of a comment.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Hi, so I grew up in the Bahamas, so I also consider myself an island baby, definitely. And Isaac, actually, I wanted to pick up on something that you were saying about music, art, culture. It's so rich in these beautiful islands that you guys come from, and the rest of us around the world benefit from them massively in our day-to-day lives, whether we turn on the radio and Bob Marley's singing a tune, or I mean in many, many ways. And I think that's a beautiful way for you guys to connect and reaffirm those connections with youth in the developing world, in the developed world, so-called developed world. And I'd love to hear more about some of those ties and opportunities perhaps that we haven't made the most of yet, and maybe other ways to try and shake up the conversation, try and get youth engaged from different parts of the world to look through different lenses, perhaps.
I think you hit it on the head. Music is something that brings people together. It allows you to basically, in my mind anyway, what I associate music with is you take away all your layers of, like, you build yourself up and you go into these negotiation settings and everyone's just high level tension everywhere because you're all obviously fighting for your positions and interests. But music can pierce straight through that and allow people to actually resonate with one another and, you know, relate on a human element. I think that's the issue that we often forget, is that we are all human beings, and music does provide that opportunity to bring you together. We often speak about in the Pacific talanoa, which is sitting down, you know, everyone's just having a bit of a chat, but you get a lot achieved when no one has their guard up. Basically, you can just go through and tick off a lot of stuff that ordinarily might have taken you a couple of hours, and in 10 minutes, you're like seeing each other as a person rather than this is that country, this is that country. And I think, like you were saying, music is the platform that allows us to pierce through that. And I would say youth are we're pretty good at having a good time. We are also very serious as well. But we have that balance between moving between both of those worlds and using one platform that can serve our purpose, and then also at the same time coming across with a strong message there as well. So I think youth are already doing that. They're engaging, they're using their social media, like I said, but you see them in, like, I think there was the Conference of the Youth event a couple of nights ago, and it allows people just to come together and pretty much just be family. We're all dealing with the same stuff, like I mentioned, but yeah, I feel like I'm repeating, so I'm just going to leave it there. I'm going to give it to my colleague from Micronesia, because she's from the Pacific as well.
Thank you, Isaac. That was so nice of you. I believe that art will heal us. I believe that art will bring us together. And when you think about the education system, what is the first program to be cut when there's no funds? It's art. Why? Why do we cut art when that's the thing that connects us? When we thinking about the ways our ancestors would have done this, we would have used the resources we had. We would have taken stock of what we have, what we don't have, and what we do have, we use for the messaging. And like Isaac said, the youth today are just so connected. They're tech inherent, I hear is the term. And so when you're raised in that, you just know how to use a remote control, which is awesome. And so using your platforms, finding influencers to also share those messages around the world and on a bigger platform, I think is super helpful. But I'm, seeing how the youth is taking up arms and questioning the system and making change. I think there's a lot that's going to be happening in the next 5-10 years, hopefully sooner.
All right. Well, thank you all so very much. We really appreciate it. And thank you so much to these amazing panelists for sharing their stories. We really appreciate you being here to listen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Batteries off on these, multitasking, and then definitely